I'm back for part 2 of an AMA series where I'm answering viewer questions about the W, college basketball, and anything in between, really. In part 1, I ranked the best offensive players this season in 2024, also talked about the Minnesota Lynx, the Chicago Sky, as well as the new unrivaled women's basketball league. If you want to get involved, give me your hot take, give me your question for a future edition of this series. Leave a comment in the community tab and I'll make sure to get to that in the future. Our first question comes in from Matthew. Who is the better player, Arike Ogunbowale or Kelsey Mitchell? I feel like Arike is a better floor raiser, but Kelsey's shooting might make her a better fit next to other great offensive players. As far as the second part, I agree. I would say with Arike's raw scoring talent, it gives you a solid enough floor, but like you're seeing with Dallas this season, just because of her scoring ability, there's a lot of pros to what she can do, but the cons are also really bad as well because of her shot selection and tendency to sometimes take over games in a bad way. There's games where it takes over in a good way as well. It's just very hit or miss. But this season for Arike, 22.6 points, almost five rebounds, 5 assists, 40% from 2, 35% from 3, 92% from the line. I want to dive a little bit deeper into her type of shots she's taking. So 40% on catch and shoot threes, exceptional mark. The problem is only 19% of her field goal attempts actually come on catch and shoot threes. A majority of her shots are coming off the dribble. 27% on pull-up threes, or 29% on pull-up threes. 27% of her field goal attempts are coming on those shots. And then also 46% at the rim, which is an egregious number, and only 14% of her field goal attempts come at the rim. So what you can gather from those numbers right there, and then also backed by the eye test, watching Dallas play and Arike's role within their offensive structure, it's a lot of pull-up jumpers, and she's good off the ball, but because of Dallas's current roster situation, and also Arike's willingness to move off the ball, because a lot of times she's just standing around. But whenever she actually puts in effort to move off the ball, run off screens, she's exceptional in that role. It's just a lot more limited compared to Kelsey Mitchell, who's just much more willing to play off the ball. Even last season, when she was the number one option, her percentage of catch and shoot threes was much higher than Arike's was. And then also, the other thing is, Arike doesn't generate rim pressure really much at all. She's a good athlete. She's incredibly shifty with her handle, but she likes to use her handle to get into the mid-range or into a deep step back jumper rather than using her handle and her speed to get downhill. With Kelsey Mitchell, on the other hand, 19 points, 2 rebounds, almost 2 assists. I will say her assist numbers are not as good as Arike's, but they're sort of in a similar tier as a passer. Arike is more flashy as a passer, more creative, but in terms of like decision making and overall process as a passer, maybe K Mitch is a little bit better there. It's not that different for me, but as far as her shooting splits, 51% from 2, 40% from 3, 85% from the line, much better in all 3 categories. 44% on catch and shoot threes, 31% of her field goal attempts come on those shots, which is pretty much double of what Arike has. Also 31% on pull-up threes, which is better as well. Only 13% of her shots come there. And then a much better mark as well, 56% at the rim. Really respectable mark there. And her rim attempts are not fully like on ball. She's a good cutter. She can run off screens well. She can make plays in transition, like, off the elite outlet passes of Caitlin Clark. So with all of that said, laying out the skill sets for each, also should have mentioned they're both probably similar tier defenders, just not impact defenders, or at least not like above average defenders. Arike can make plays in passing lanes a little bit more than K Mitch can, but still neither are really incredible defenders. That said, I would agree. I would say K Mitch is just a better player for me, a more valuable player within a team structure. Arike's more fun if you just like to watch highlights. But in terms of like who can make an impact on winning, I would much rather have Kelsey Mitchell's skill set. Next question comes in from Patrick. What's basically being asked is, who are the best 3-and-D players in the W? Like they said, I know people complain about the importance of these type of players since they're getting max contracts, but people don't see how rare they are and highly valued. Most championships now in the NBA have these players. I agree. These 3-and-D players are extremely rare, especially because, for me, I think the 3-and-D archetype is overused because Benijah Laney-Hamilton, Kayla McBride, these aren't 3-and-D players. They do much more off the bounce as far as like drawing fouls, getting to the rim, playmaking. So I don't think calling them a 3-and-D player is really the best way to call them. I would rather call them like a utility wing or something like that. But as far as what is a real pure 3-and-D wing, you look at these players I have here on this list: Bridget Carlton, Leonie Phoebish, Rebecca Allen, Lexi Hull, Kayla Thornton. With these players, you're talking about extremely low self-created rates. So it's a lot of spot-up threes. If they're driving, it's off a cut, it's off a transition, breakaway play. And their defense, they're versatile defenders. That's another trait with this archetype as well. It's make your spot-up threes. It's defend and really fill gaps on both ends of the court. So I just think, yeah, like you said, the value of these players is immense, but I would say Bridget Carlton has been the best player of this archetype this season. But the all-time 3-and-D player is probably Alicia Clark. She doesn't really get a ton of assists. It's a lot of spot-up threes. So I would say like Clark is like the mainstay of what I think an actual 3-and-D player is. But Jatori Walker-Kimbrough and Victoria Vivians are some other honorable mentions. But moving to the next question, I think the Indiana Fever will have an advantage in the playoffs because they will basically have home court advantage even on the road. They have way too many fans. That's a big advantage. Yeah, I think this is a good take. I think it's a fair take as far as the Indiana Fever. I would say, though, the thing with the WNBA playoffs and how the current standings are lining up, you're playing against Connecticut in the first round. It's a 3-game series. The first 2 games will be on the road. So at best, you're getting 1 home game in the first round. But also, like you said, there's a chance that it's a home environment on the road. And especially in Uncasville, I'm kind of interested to see how that'll be. What percentage of Connecticut fans is it versus what percentage of Indiana Fever / Caitlin Clark fans / Aaliyah Boston fans is it? So, like you said, I think it's a good take and a fair take at that one. Next, I'd be interested to see a video on flagrant fouls. Have there been more / less of them over the years? Have any teams had a lot of them or any players been victim to a lot of them? So I actually looked through the numbers to answer this question. This season, we actually do have a new record holder for the most flagrant fouls in a season. If you want to guess, it's Kennedy Carter. It's Kennedy Carter. She has 4 technical fouls, or flagrant fouls, this season. Diana Taurasi is second with 3, which is actually tied for the second most in WNBA history. Just another stat on flagrant fouls. There have been 51 individual player seasons where someone picked up multiple flagrant fouls. 23 of those have come in the last 4 WNBA seasons. So almost half of the players that have gotten multiple flagrant fouls in a season have come in the last 4 seasons. So yeah, there have been more of them of late. Why is this happening? I don't know, but it is interesting. If you have any thoughts, if you know why, if you have a take there, let me know in the comments below. Next question. This is about Georgia Amoore as well as Jade Melbourne. With this, Jade is younger, taller, with more pro experience, the starting point guard for the Opals, yet her value was apparently a 3rd-round pick. Meanwhile, Georgia has been consistently a projected first-rounder. Is Georgia's ceiling higher? Love both players, but I've been thinking about this since the Olympics. With this take, I wouldn't necessarily say her ceiling is higher, but the reason Jade went 3rd round is just because she is Australian, and with that, she wasn't going to come to the W immediately. She was more of a draft and stash. Even then, though, I did some scouting on Jade pre-draft. She should have been gone well before the 3rd round. I said that even then it was a steal of the draft to get that much value with a 19-year-old guard who was exceptional in the WNBL and the top league in Australia as a teenager. Even Amoore wasn't that good as a teenager. She struggled in like the semi-pro league in Australia as a teenager. But as far as like the differences between them, how do they compare? I would say Jade is a better defender and has more upside as a finisher as well. Just being 5'10" versus Amoore being like 5'5.5", 5'6" ish. But the difference with Amoore is she is a much, 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 much better shot creator off the bounce, also off the dribble, off movement, catch and shoot. She's just a much better shooter and scorer. So if you value upside in terms of like who can be a higher career scoring average, if that makes sense, like who can average more points in their career, I would say Georgia Amoore has higher upside. But I think with Jade being a bigger guard, the playmaking flashes, the finishing, the touch, there's a reason I could understand if you had Jade higher. But I would say like Georgia Amoore for me is like a fringe first round pick in 2025. We'll see where she ends up for me, but I think, yeah, they're both players that are going to be a part of Australia's next Olympic team and probably like their two best point guard options, honestly, with Sammy Whitcomb and a couple other players also getting older at the guard position. So interesting question there. Final question I want to cover today. It says draft heuristic for projecting shooting and Euro prospects. How much do you value RAPM, which is like an all-in-one production-based statistic, and general production? To hit on the first part first for projecting shooting, I think a big indicator for me is how a player shoots contested versus uncontested. Also, I think if you can make shots off the dribble, and I think with shooting in general, if you have production over a 4-year sample, that's much more important than the aesthetics of a shot. Because, for example, Maddie Williams at Oklahoma, if you aren't familiar, Maddie Williams was a career 30% three-point shooter at Oklahoma. The mechanics looked like very good, but she just like never made threes. Like if you just looked at her mechanics and didn't look at her numbers at all, you had no idea her numbers, you would have probably thought she was a 40% three-point shooter. So a little bit of that was like giving you false hope that she'd become a shooter, but she just never had the background of being that, like besides like little spurts. So I think like actual production from a shooting standpoint is super important. I would also say like mid-range shooting, if you're really good in the mid-range, if you're good on catch and shoot jumpers contested, that's important as well. How much do I value RAPM? Not a ton. I don't really look at RAPM a ton. I just don't really value all-in-one statistics all that much from a scouting standpoint. And then general production, I would say I value production a lot, like I said, with shooting. But I think another way I value production is just finishing. I think finishing over a multiple year span. How do you finish in traffic, in the half court versus transition? That's another indicator for me on just finishing touch in general. So I think production is super important because more likely than not, if you're good in college, you bet on good players. If you bet on the good players over the players that haven't really proven a lot but are high upside. And that's what makes it interesting about like European prospects or even other players from Asia as well, where they're playing for a professional team as a teenager, so they're limited production. So you have to look at their youth tape playing for their national team at like a U17, U19, U18, U20 event. So I think the players that star in those events year over year are usually the players that become WNBA prospects. You look at Carla Leite, you look at Layla Khan, those players were elite players in those events, became first-round picks in the W. Same with Nadia Pacha as well. Like, I just think production is super important, even if it's not even in their professional league. How they produce with their age group is also super important. But you have to value upside as well, skill sets, intangibles, and frames as well. Like you bet on players with long arms, with good movement abilities, plus size, all of that as well. Processing speed. Can someone play make at the forward position? Can they handle the ball? I think all of those factors go into the overall scout on a player, not even just with just shooting in general. I think it's just I could talk about scouting in general for like an hour plus just on this subject right here, but with the college season coming up, I'll have plenty more on the draft, college prospects, and we can get to that a little bit more and like the nuances of what I make what I think makes a good prospect. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below, what you agree and disagree with. If you have any suggestions for future videos, if you have any questions for me to answer in a future edition of the series, let me know. Anyway, subscribe, like this video, comment for the algorithm, and I'll see y'all next time.